think you know everybody, but let me tell you a little bit about them. Kristina basically brought digital media into the world working at the Apple Media Lab, and throughout her career has really worked to make sure that creativity was at the center of what technology was all about. And it's been work that most recently led her to be the exact right fit for the person to manage the new construction of the Exploratorium as they moved out to the piers in San Francisco. She never managed a construction project in her life, but she absolutely understood how to make a space and the exhibits and the philosophy of the Exploratorium move to a new way. So Kristina was on the board for 7 years, and we're not ruling out another term. Lev has the honor of the most number, we were debating last night over dinner, I'm going to concede it to him, the most number of institutions that he's brought into the NMC. Every institution that he's been at since the NMC was founded, basically, has been a member, 4 institutions altogether. I don't think there's anyone else that can claim that title. And
he can't keep a job. I mean, that's
yeah, well, I was going to go there, but I decided not to. And in fact, he's taking on a new job in just a few weeks, and he is moving into an area of great passion for him, the Digital Cities movement. He's going to be heading up, what's the new name of it?
One Community.
One Community. A phenomenal organization that Lev's been on the board of in Cleveland, and so we're really glad you're here. Scott has been working to help museums be innovative and creative for years with his lovely wife, Chris. He runs Sandbox Studios and has had a great and lasting impact on the way that museums across the world think about technology. He's a scholar. He teaches in universities and also does amazing multimedia work. So that's our panel. Mm-hmm. And Scott, in the last few months, the NMC board has really been putting together a plan to build out the next phase of where we're going. This entire meeting actually has been a piece of that plan. Maybe you might start by sharing some of that work.
Sure. Well, let me just start off by saying this is actually the most exciting session of the whole thing. Even though I know we're all going to be heading out to the airport after this, this is really the official end of the first 20 years of the NMC and the official beginning of the next. And the board takes a lot of responsibility for, trying to bring all of your visions and needs together moving forward. I'm just finishing my board term. In fact, I have now officially passed it to Vijay Komar. Vijay, are you, I think, where are you hiding? Why don't you stand up, Vijay, because it's really important that all of you know everybody knows who Larry is. It's really important for you to know who the chair of the board is. And Vijay is going to be leading the charge forward with the rest of the board in setting a strategic plan a long-term strategic plan for 5 years out, and then an annual strategic plan moving forward. But it's a very transitional moment for us, and there's a few things I want to ask you to do. Because you guys are why we're up here and why the NMC exists. And one thing is, this isn't a conference where we beat you over the head about filling out assessments, but if you look in your book, you'll see there's an assessment for every component of this conference. And if there's ever been an important time for us to get some feedback from you guys about the conference and what's working and what's not, that's one really good channel for you to communicate with the NMC staff and the board about what you like. The other thing is could we have all the board members as well as the NMC staff that are in the room stand up for a second? All of these people are your conduits outside of the formalities of evaluation for you to tell them what you really like, what you really thought was screwed up. We need to know this stuff because this is where part of the strategy comes from. There's one part about the thanks. You guys can but our ability to serve you and your colleagues, and hopefully a much greater community that's in this room today, a lot of people who wanted to be here and can't be here, and those who have already left, is just getting really clear feedback from you as to what's working and what's not. You've probably seen, even in the last couple of years, the NMC's been changing a lot. And with the Horizon project has become a really important component of the overall mission of the NMC, and obviously that's going to be taken into one of the things we as a board need to think about is how does the Horizon project and what the NMC summer conference and those things, how do they interact with each other now, and how should they interact with each other in the future? At the same time, we have some really successful new programs like the K-12 Ambassador Program, like what we just got finished seeing, the Emerging Leaders. These are new threads for the NMC, and I think really exciting ones. We want to know what you think about those things. I think they're fantastic, but we want to know what you think about those. And you've also seen that some of the programmatic things that we've done in the past have been scaled back. 5 minutes of fame, as Larry said, will probably be here until all of us are dead and gone. But there's a lot of movement, and so we're really interested in looking at all of those things moving forward, knowing that the world's changing around us, and the reason this organization was formed in the first place is why we're here today. Other than us all coming together as a community, the challenges we face and the opportunities we have to grapple with are all very different. So.
Yeah. So last night we went out to dinner to talk about what we were going to talk about today, and I brought the tablecloth for you. It has our notes on it. Well, this is the cab, but these are the notes. And one of the things that we talked about over dinner were the essential things that we want to still have 20 years from now. And Lev, you had an eloquent set of thoughts around community and who we are.
I warned you that it was going to require at least 2 glasses of Cabernet to get back at it. One of the things that matters in an organization that's changing, dealing with change all the time, is to understand the continuity. What binds us together over 20 years and on to the next 20 years. And I think some of the vignettes in the video, Larry, actually gave us some pretty compelling insights. Kristina started by talking about the NMC being born at the birth of the digital revolution. And it's a revolution, folks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And not everybody who deals with the revolution comes up smelling like roses. It's hard. You've all been through the trenches. You've understood the challenges. And again, even many of the emerging projects that we heard about, these are ambitious. These have a lot of chutzpah. This is about really challenging the status quo. And one of the things that I think really, really important, Larry, just to sort of to start with, is it matters that we're actually connected to each other through community. Wendy called it her family in the video piece. And that is enormously important. It's enormously important to feel like you have support. That you're, the young chap from Chile said, crazy man story, right? Sometimes we all think of ourselves as kind of being out there on the edge. And I called this community here, our community, the vanguard. And we want to always understand the challenges of being that vanguard. And sometimes we have to really understand that it's not a popularity contest because we're trying to change the future, period.
Kristina?
What?
You were a big part of us beginning to pay attention to museums, beginning to pay attention to K-12. And Lev and I remember very well, those were challenging conversations. We weren't all able to really see the value in that. And, and now we're 5 years down that road. you've been a school board president, you've been involved in schools all of your working career. What can we learn from those environments that we should keep in clear focus?
I mean, I think Lev has said it well, and you should know that Lev and I, and also Larry, were on the board together forever, I believe, during the early days of this organization. And early days have all the excitement of being able to tell stories sentimentally from a distance, but also it was really tough times because indeed people at that time, and again, some of you are old enough to remember, and some of you are not, and each situation is a good one. But being, you'd worry, well, no one will ever learn how to use a mouse. I mean, that was the kind of question that you had in terms of why this was not possible. And you thought, really? Really? That's what's going to stop this revolution? And so there's a lot of issues like that we dealt with, I think, that were interesting and important. But what's important in terms of this organization and any other one is to both go through those times, but also keep building for the future. Which is what I think this organization really is about and can be about. One of the things that Larry didn't say in terms of the brief overview of me is that actually my son was on the board for 3 years. And that's the kind of piece that I really want to convey here, because there's some of us who have done some of the early work, but you get a little tired, and also there's things that you don't know about. And so being able to have the new people here really pick up the challenge and move it forward, realizing that if you're doing your work, it never gets much easier. And also being able to say some of the same things again and again. I was interested, I actually don't have my iPhone, that's amazing, I'll pretend this is my iPhone, is that I remember in a lot of the early talks I used to say, okay, now, if I had something in in fact it's better it's not an iPhone, if I had something in my hand that was about this size, and this is probably about 1996 I was saying this, I said, if I had something in my hand that was this size, and I could connect with all of the world, and I could get all the published documents as well as conversations with all the experts in just a push of a button. If I did that, what would it mean to go into a biology class in high school and take an exam? What is that going to be about? I have this in my hand. It's available to me all the time. And I don't think people then understood what I was talking about much, and I don't think most people understand now. And especially now when I pull out the iPhone, they say, oh, there's the answer, you got the iPhone. I thought, no, that's not the question. The question is, indeed, how does this change in this funny little thing? How does that actually change a lot of human activity and human endeavors? And those are the kind of questions that, incidentally, people in schooling have been thinking about for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so it's really important to keep remembering what we have learned there. The advantage that I have on it, Larry, is that what I saw technology doing was making it possible to talk about learning independent of institutions. In other words, you don't need to think about learning in universities. You don't have to think about learning in K-12. Very simple thought that actually turns out to have major implications. And each of those institutions have their institutional inertia. Each of you who live in each of them know what those things are. They're not always pretty. They got their own character, and sometimes you think, really, that's how because you've done it this way, you're going to keep doing it this way? But I think that being able to go across those institutions is something that NMC has done, and I think it's really put the focus on learning. Do you care if someone learns something in a robotics workshop or in a classroom or in a hotel? It doesn't matter, really, and especially in these devices, the anytime, anyplace learning, really revolutionary 30 years ago, we still sort of don't quite do that much. We do it a bit, but we don't do it much. So again, that's the context, I think, is for us to remember, like mentor teachers, master teachers. I was fortunate in elementary school to have master teacher. I went to a lab school. Every one of them was a master teacher. What a gift. And to see the qualities of people who are of that nature, and to learn how these devices can make those people available to more people, or as was suggested earlier in terms of mentor training. How do you generalize that? How do you scale it? Because in contrast to many things, though these things might be $1,000, for $1,000, the notion that this capability is available to everybody in the world, it should be done right away if it's right. So anyway, NMC, though, I think is a place, and I see people here who I've seen for 20 years as part of this organization. I've seen people here I've seen for 10 years. I've been in the architecture business for the last 5 years, wondering how, I mean, it's mental space, virtual space, and real space, because real space matters still. And how do you create the real spaces that encourage that education? But I think that here, I really encourage, it's the network here, it's the support you can give to each other. That's what it's always been. I laughed at us yesterday because we were doing our recording and everything was about the technology. Mm-hmm. And our mantra is, it's not about the technology. But indeed, just realize we've tried every single one of those technologies, and there'll be a new one tomorrow and you'll try it. And then there's a new one the next day and you'll try it. And if you don't like change and you don't like risk, you're in the wrong business. Mm-hmm. And so again, pleased to be here.
Yeah. That notion that you were able to conceptualize that scenario of having all that in your hand 20 years ago, more or less, begs the question, what are we going to be, what do we need in 20 years from now? And, Lev, you're deeply involved in thinking about the role of cities and communities, and the technology itself is getting to be very simple. So where are the big opportunities going to lie, do you think?
Well, I invite feedback. I mean, to Scott's point, this is part of an ongoing ecosystem of people who are thinking boldly and pushing boundaries and frontiers, Larry. I'll offer you two, just to open up the conversation about futures. One is a concept that I think I borrow from spending 12 years in a university setting where there's an enormous amount of work going on in medical education and teams of people who are involved in the Genome Project, and what that has really meant to the world of personalized medicine getting this close to that notion of really being able to do targeted targeted delivery, not generic cancer treatment, but targeted specifically to you, to exactly your DNA. And in 20 years, I can't help but imagine that we'll also be in a serious set of conversations of not only creating taxonomies, but actually solution sets that actually is all about what might be called a learning genome project, or a direct delivery to the personalized learning predisposition, learning styles, the ability to choreograph and to curate all that content that, again, that you were thinking about, Kristina, 20 plus years ago, and that reality of the tsunami of content that's out there. So I offer that as kind of one, I think, very, very important vector or arc of activity. And the other one I would say is that, we're all responsible for breaking down the walls of the university, the museum, the schoolhouse. I mean, that's what we are, and that's that vanguard role, I think, that we've played when it intersects with the technology. And so I think in the next 20 years, the classroom of the future, if you will, the learning space, the experience of learning, will actually be in the cities and in the communities around us. And it'll be about taking challenge-based and problem-based learning opportunities and reinventing the notion of a field visit, or going out to the museum for the day, the notion of the yellow buses that many of us grew up with. I think all that's going to turn on its head, because I think basically the entire community, the neighborhood, is actually going to become hyper-connected through basically programmable cities, programmable world. And we now have a huge and extraordinary opportunity as educators to actually imagine that curriculum as a co-produced, co-invented project with student learners from 6 to 86 along the way. And I think in 20 years, we'll be thinking about cities as learning spaces in ways that are not just conceptual, but also stitching together, I think in very important ways, technology that makes that possible to have the rigor of a standard curriculum, but is really something that is, at this point in time, probably every bit as hard to conceive of as Kristina's insight about what if I could have everything inside some kind of a device that had all of the information and expertise around the world.
Yeah. So, Scott, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I want to let folks know that we would like to hear from you as well. And so I have a question for Scott, but we'd like, if you have questions or if you have comments, we have mics around, or you can just shout it out, but we're coming to you soon, so be thinking about that. But Scott, you and I had the most unique opportunity in the last couple of months to really think about what an organization that lived in perpetuity would be like, and what kinds of skill sets, organizational skill sets, would be important. We had the opportunity to make a pitch for an endowment, and we didn't get it, but we made a really good pitch.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that opportunity, that gave us the opportunity to do a lot of soul searching about what the NMC, I mean, it's part of what, again, brought up this whole conversation. It's interesting how these opportunities arise, and they cause a lot of introspection that really then helps you realize we have to, do a lot more work on kind of painting what the future is. And it's, I think from our conversation last night, I remember in particular something that Kristina was saying, part of what are, as important as the technologies themselves are, that what really brings us together and is probably going to be the theme that we focus on in perpetuity is that of learning. And it doesn't really matter what the tool set is, because every year we come here, I mean, who was talking about MOOCs last year? I mean, it was, it's, and now, and will we be talking about MOOCs next year? Who knows? But what's common across all of those things is learning, and I think that is very core to what our long-term goal is going to be. And I think some of our strongest presentations we've seen are about that. The other thing that I'm the most excited about having to do with NMC is this ability for us to play this very unique role of bringing these different communities together, as been inferred in some of these other comments, to be able to actually have people from the museum space, to be able to have people from the library space, to be able to have K-12, to be able to have higher ed. We were talking last night, we need to look at more ways to get connected to governmental and political levels, as well as different ways of trying to bring in corporations, but not based on their corporate interests in selling, but more to actually have them around the table when we're talking about some of this learning theory that can significantly impact some of the work that they do. But this whole ecosystem of learning is changing so drastically. I mean, museums all of a sudden are greatly empowered because informal learning is becoming something that's more and more respected. And it's actually, the genie's out of the bottle as far as formal versus informal learning. Informal learning is growing gangbusters, and formal learning is struggling to try to figure out how it fits in the cracks of the huge world that we're now in with informal learning. But, and that's where all those components of K-12 higher ed libraries and schools really can come together and figure out how to hold hands in a new way, because we've been able to work in our silos for quite a while and try to influence people across the aisle. But NMC makes it so these are the only aisles we have at NMC, is these aisles in the room. Otherwise, we're all together, and it's a really unique opportunity for us from all these different communities to talk about shared issues, shared opportunities, and what lies ahead for us.
Larry, if I could just sort of chime in and again encourage those of you in the audience today to be thinking about joining the conversation. Scott referred to the cracks between formal and informal, and there is really tectonic shift going on here. And I think one of the biggest challenges that each of you, us, face is actually our identities in that tectonic shift. Mm-hmm. Many of us have relationships to institutions, and it was because in an earlier moment in time, that's how we actually saw the opportunity to advance the revolution. Mm-hmm. But if the tectonic shifts are as real as I believe they are, and I think everyone up here certainly believes, then how we as that vanguard play may or may not be situated exclusively inside the institutional environments. And I challenge all of us to figuring out, we talked last night about the brokering role of the NMC in this, and the bridging between the tectonic plates that are shifting here. Mm-hmm. It could be an extraordinarily exciting opportunity for the organization, but what about you? What does that mean every day when you get up? Mm-hmm. To think about your creative contribution to either accelerating those tectonic shifts or trying to find ways for the things that you have passion about for bridging those different elements.
You know, Kristina, you've spent the last 3 or 4 years, I guess it's been, 5 years. Kristina's had the opportunity to take a really, really successful, highly regarded learning organization that's absolutely the tops in the world at informal learning and completely reinvent it from top to bottom.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, so I worked until last week at the Exploratorium. I'm on summer vacation now for the next N years. Is that I work at the Exploratorium, which is known as the Science Museum in San Francisco. For those of you who don't know us, well known for hands-on interaction in terms of understanding deep concepts, founded by a physicist and therefore thought to be about science. We grew up in in fact, I should just ask, how many people know what the Exploratorium is already? Okay, so we have about half of you. That's just exciting. So it's an organization that's 40 years old, just turned 40 years old. But I think what's relevant here is that we did have this amazing opportunity to move from a location where we originated and where many people who began their careers there are still working at the Exploratorium, to move to a new facility on the San Francisco waterfront. It happens to be a gorgeous location. I mean, just gorgeous aesthetically. Though that's not always functional, so I want to make that distinction. I happen to think it is as well. But to move to a place right in the middle of San Francisco, to me it's more accessible, transit-friendly, et cetera. I'm obviously biased. So we made this huge move, but I think that what was most interesting in that is I learned the metaphor of the move, and I've actually been giving talks about this to librarians and others, because I think that when you do that in your mind, if you're saying, okay, we're this organization that's done all these things, well, which is not always, it's almost harder to move that, because why not just stay how you are, is that we conceptualize, so what does it mean to provide a place now that people can get even more access to, where we can show people that we're actually an institution. It's not about science only, it's really about learning. We are a learning institution. We do research on learning. We have 25 PhDs who study learning, not science, but the learning of science. So there was a lot of things that we did as we thought deeply about it that then we needed to show. And what I was lucky enough to do was to think about how to show that in physical space, which I happen to be very interested in. It's probably my medium. Odd that I'm in technology, but I like being able to make things in real space. So I challenge actually the NMC to think about that for ourselves, for yourselves, in terms of thinking, like, who are you? How would you make yourself? How would you show yourself? How would you be that? How would you build the new NMC campus? Though, I mean, again, interestingly, with Second Life, you've actually taken one go at it. But what's the next one? And I think that there, what you start to do is you no longer think of yourself as the thing that's wonderful about museums is they're public. That's what I learned. Museums are public. Anybody can walk in anytime. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to get accepted. You can come in and just because or we have lots of exhibits that we charge for tickets now so that we can continue, which is an important thing. How do you do your economic sustainability, which this organization needs to think about also. It's key. But beyond that, how do you make that available to everyone, which was the dream of public education? Public education is an incredibly radical concept. Candidly, digital revolution is less significant than the notion of public education. Public education is the key to the development of civilization. I mean, candidly, obviously biased view. But in terms of if you think about a public education, it should in fact be the case that the public in fact has engagement in that and the ability to enter into it. And museums teach you a little bit about that. Because public schools now is wherever you live, you go to that one, right? It's a little bit of a diminished notion in terms of the common good. But to jump back, I think that in terms of thinking about how these different organizations, these institutions actually do have different histories, and you can learn a lot from them. And I've been fortunate enough to be in higher education environment, been in the corporate environment at Apple, and now in a nonprofit. And I truly think being able to have those mutual experiences, both in terms of the economics as well as the drivers, is important. And I think that that's what this organization actually has as well, which is why I think I've always had the congeniality, because I think that that combination can actually let you live well in your organization, because not all of us are going to, I mean, we need to stay in some of these places as we invent new ones. But I think that that's really an opportunity.
I want to just throw one thing in that hasn't been mentioned yet, but it's I think potentially a big game changer for NMC as well, which is our international reach. Just in the last 5 years, we've made tremendous inroads to having an international footprint with Horizon reports and staff members going and presenting on the work of the NMC worldwide. And if you look at the range of people who we've seen present with poster sessions and up on the stage, we had somebody from Chile just a couple minutes ago. We're starting to hear what's going on in those parts of the world, but we also have a lot to present out. And so it's another whole area for us to explore, just like these different disciplines that we're talking about coming together.
So we need to be sensitive to time, and I think it's time to turn it to you. Does anyone have a question or a comment? Yes, Troy.
Technology's doing a really good job of tearing down walls, which implies freedom. The walls also imply security. And it's just going and going. And we tend to see pendulums with shifts. And do you think that it's going to swing all the way to ultimate no walls, and then will it shift back in the next 20 years to where there's going to be more walls? And what are the walls going to be?
Who wants to take that?
I can offer a start, and I think it's enormously important construct to be thinking about, whether it's the pendulum or what do we do in a moment of shifting sands, which is, again, to kind of think of the tectonic plate image that comes to my mind. I think there's always going to be not only an interest in, but a need for garden walls. For some, but not for others. And we've moved very much from a one size pretty much fits all, or a hierarchical ranking, if you will. If it's not one size fits all, then we kind of have this implicit value ranking of kind of institutional prestige. I think all that's contested right now, and all for the good. But the garden walls, I think, are going to be an important part for some people moving forward. I think we will probably see significant institutional repositioning going on. Have no doubt that institutions that have survived 800 years, or in this country, somewhere between 50 and 150 years, aren't going to throw in the towel. But I do think that we have this opportunity both to be pushing the boundaries of our institutions to being more porous, if not completely finding ourselves in quicksand, and at the same time trying to create opportunities for what I would call hubs, or this brokering role that Scott refers to, which is really about connecting together the learning community of the environment in which you live, which is not just the institution that you may have a relationship to. And I think that's kind of what the next piece of blueprint or architecture is about. For myself personally, and very, again, hard retrospection, is to try to become an architect of a hub that brings museums, libraries, governments, schools, healthcare together into a learning community that has geography as its binding, and then hopefully networking those with others who want to embark on a similar kind of project.
Yeah.
And I would jump in terms of the notion of the word walls. Again, remember, I've been in the physical architectural sense. Realize that those walls in the past have been able to define structures that are large and complex. And I know oftentimes when people hear that I worked in a corporation, it's kind of like, wow, how horrible, you're a corporate person. So I think, what a corporation is an incredibly complex web of having people working together for similar goals. We can argue about the goals, we can argue about the mechanisms, but in fact it's a set of experiences so you can do more than you can as a single individual. So institutions have real value. Right now, all of you are on your devices. You've got lives going on in 12 other places that I don't have any insight onto. And those are walls for you. I know we have one for our family. We have 5 of us, 3 kids and my husband and I. And we, each day we're in touch with each other. We have a little wall that takes good care of us on a good day in terms of keeping us connected with a common set of caring for each other. Those things are absolutely critical, and the stability that they offer and the confidence you have in terms of people taking care of you, older to younger and all the way across. So I think what we need to do on these things is to realize that a lot of our literal metaphors, in fact, have changed. And so the notion is, what are these new organizations? I mean, I happen to like face-to-face a lot, old-fashioned that I am, but I think having everybody here in one place affords certain kinds of things. Having us distributed has other things. We now do have a way to connect with each other. I mean, that's what these little devices do for us that we couldn't do before. So it's how to reconceptualize and imagine institutions so that they have some of this fluidity that literally is not possible if you're in a brick and mortar spot in Cleveland and one in San Francisco. I mean, that's a very tough wrangle without these devices. But now the organizations can be of a different sort. So we should keeping the good parts.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Yeah, well, one last thing, and then we'll go to you. And that is that if it's not us who conceptualizes, these new spaces, who will it be? If it's not people like us, the vanguardists, as Lev described them, that are not wrestling with these issues. And in Cheryl's great talk, and failing at it, until we get it right. In the picture of the bad origami next to the perfect origami, it's us that needs to do that.
Kristina, in her opening remarks, mentioned something that I've been obsessing about pretty much ever since I've been working within higher education, which is just about 5 years, so it's not a long time. But she mentioned institutional inertia. I used to work in government, and I was always amazed at how slow things happened in government. Well, government is the speed of light compared to educational institutions in general. My question for you all is, what advice do you have for higher education institutions or institutions in general to break free of this inertia, this awful, awful inertia?
Good senses of humor. I mean,
Embrace the ambiguity. I mean, you have to embrace the ambiguity, and it's not just about survival. You have to strive. You actually have to thrive in that ambiguity. For a guy who's sort of lasted 25 years, in that environment, myself, and when I speak to students who are thinking about, or colleagues who are thinking about lives inside the academy, I think that set of contradictions or the inertia that you're speaking of, it's not only inertia. I mean, my colleagues from Case Western are well represented at this gathering. The institution is not only about inertia, it pushes back, and sometimes it can be hard and ruthless for those who are trying to engage in change. And so it's solidarity, not only in your institution, but again, I think the core value of the NMC is to realize, and it's not just to bemoan and bitch about how slow the institution is to move, but to actually celebrate when the institution does move, and when you create cracks that then become fissures, that then become tectonic shifts. The revolution doesn't happen on its own, folks.
Yeah. That's
it's
true.
not going to be broadcast on TV either, as someone once said. So this is the group that's making a big part of it. And the corporate and the venture bonanza that's going on, where we see quote unquote tons of change going on, that's our faculty colleagues marrying up with the corporate sensibilities. And again, whether we think it's perfect or it's just iteration 0.9, I think that those are important things to understand as part of the ambiguity of life inside the academy.
Yeah, my advice to you is to learn to beg for forgiveness. And don't waste time asking permission.
Yep.
Amen.
A lot of inertia goes away if you quit asking permission. And
I think
you will get bruised once in a while, though.
I think both of these questions point out another really important role for NMC, and we've begun really in the last 2 years. We've done 2 retreats in the spring. This last year was Wicked Challenges, and remind me of the theme of the first one.
The Metatrends.
Megatrends, right? And it was Wicked Problems, not Wicked Challenges. But this is and those questions are very relevant to the level of discussions that are taking place at those retreats, as well as, probably even more importantly, because those retreats are relatively small in scale, the information that comes out of those. I've always found myself, when I look at the Horizon Report, while the technologies are interesting, the more interesting part of the Horizon Report is about the challenges. And those are the kind of discussions, again, us coming together as a community can really help each other work through. None of us have the answers to some of these things, but as a community, as Lev was implying, we can work toward that.
So Scott, I'm going to let you have the last word because we are out of time, and I have yet more things to do. There are many people to thank and acknowledge, but at the head of that list are the three of you. We could do this for hours. I mean, I thank you very, very much. I have a token of our esteem. Let's see, Lev, Scott.
Thank you.
And then Kristina, you may recognize this color box. We got something different for you. So thank all of you. Thank you very, very much.